Welcome to the Family Skeptical, Parenting Through Nonbelief.
We're a married atheist couple raising two wonderful, strange children. We ask big questions, dissect weird parenting moments, and examine how society ignores or misrepresents families like ours. If you're any stripe of nonbeliever who's involved in raising children, welcome. You are our people.
Our kids have heard all our swears, but yours might not have. So be thoughtful if there are young people listening with you.
So kick it off, moms.
Hey, so if anybody actually took the time to read the episode description for last week, I mentioned that I wanted to retract or edit something I said in the last episode. So I want to start with that. So in our last episode, we were discussing what we think the positives are about being atheists or nonbelievers. And my main thesis was that it really allows you to learn from all sources of knowledge. And as so often happens, after the podcast was done, I do all the editing on the podcast, so I listen to them again and again and again. And I was thinking about it, and it occurred to me that that was a simplification and probably not accurate. Because truthfully, even if you believe in a religion, you can still gain wisdom from a lot of different sources. It doesn't inherently keep you from looking to a lot of different sources for wisdom. You know, it was interesting. We visited my family a couple weeks ago, and we were talking with some of them about the podcast, and they had a lot of interesting questions. And during that conversation, something came up, which I think is closer to what I was trying to say on that episode. And it's not just that you can gain knowledge from any source. I think the important thing is that you can let that knowledge freely interact. And I think when you believe in a religion, though you can learn from a lot of sources, there's an inherent hierarchy placed on the knowledge that you're dealing with. Because to some degree, the wisdom from your religion has to trump what else you're learning, unless you really want to question where you stand with that religion. So it's not just being able to look everywhere for knowledge, but it's really about being able to use that knowledge to let those ideas interact with each other in the most dynamic way possible. Because you can really look at everything on the same level. And if there's an idea that's better than another idea you have, there's no inherent blocker other than, you know, like emotions and stuff that a lot of people have that's going to keep you from going with that better idea. Mm-hmm. Does that make any sense?
And the interesting thing about all that, moms, is that that leads directly into what we're going to talk about today.
And here is where I have to say that we actually had to re-record this section. So when we first recorded, we jumped right into one of the topics we wanted to talk about. And after I listened to it, I realized that it was missing a little bit of the context I think it needed to make the most sense. So, Pops, do you want to kind of explain what we're hoping to talk about over the next couple of episodes?
Sure. So we have an idea for a 3-part podcast series where the first part talks about the importance of and the teaching of logic and the scientific method to kids, starting kindergarten, as early as they can manage to have a conversation about those sorts of things in like the most basic fundamental ways. And then moving on to talking about history education, science education, the idea being that it's important for kids to be able to have their own framework that they can draw upon to explore their world, to digest information, to analyze biases, to think critically, and to be like proper skeptics, to not take things for granted, but instead to be an active participant in the information that comes into their head and then the belief system that they come up with for themselves.
And then a third one too. So when we originally recorded, we jumped right into talking about logic. But it occurred to me that maybe we should talk a little bit more about why we're talking about education in the first place. And I recently listened to a podcast. It's a new one. It's called Raising Freethinkers, and it's done through Open Sky, which posts a lot of content for skeptics and unbelievers. And it's the podcaster is Dale McGowan, who actually on my nightstand is his book, Parenting. I think it's called Parenting Beyond Belief. But it's in its like whatever edition. He's sort of one of the guys who has been in the space for a really, really long time. And it's just him talking about what he's learned about raising kids without belief. And it's fun. It's like really short. Each episode is just 15 or 20 minutes. And he just did a series on, I think he calls it teaching science or something like that.
Great mind thinks alike. Yeah.
Exactly. So, but he tells this really interesting story. And you should totally go and listen to it. We'll link to it in the episode description. But in short, his daughter, I have no idea how old she was, sometime in grade school, won this contest. And it was a super cool contest. You had to think of an environment with very special characteristics and then put an animal in that environment and then think about how they would evolve over a million years and draw what they would look like at the end of that time. Which is like I really like that.
That's
I think
a really cool idea. Yeah.
That's a really well-designed project. And she won. So they were really proud of her and they wanted to announce it at her grade school. And so they talked to the school about it. And there was some like middle management. I mean, I guess it's not management, but there was some sort of like mid-level teacher who said, oh, we can't say it's about evolution. Like, don't say it's about evolution when you talk about it, because that's not part of the curriculum. So we can't say evolution. Just say you won an art contest.
Oh, that's great.
And of course, I mean, you can imagine how this guy who's like raising freethinkers felt about that. So he went to the principal and said, that is ridiculous. Like, clearly, if she won a calculus competition, just because you don't teach calculus in grade school, you would announce that. And the principal said, yes, of course, that is ridiculous. We will announce it as an evolution competition. So the principal interviewed her on like some class channel or broadcast or something, right? And
that's cool.
Dale is listening to it, and the principal is asking her these really open-ended questions. And she never says evolution. She says she won an art competition. And when she came home that night, Dale finds out that this interim teacher caught her 2 minutes before the interview and said, oh yeah, but just remember, you can't say evolution. So, and then there's a whole thing where they go back to the principal and it's like a lesson in sort of how to deal with these issues without becoming combative. And it's really interesting. So you should, if people are interested, go listen to all three. But what I was interested in is the reason his daughter was confused. Oh, I should also say the reason he found out about that is that one of the daughter's favorite teachers asked her to come in and speak to his class more specifically about the competition.
Mm-hmm.
And she was scared to do that because she didn't know what she could say. And it had felt so uncomfortable trying to talk around what the real competition was.
Mm-hmm.
What interested me about that, and what opened up so many ideas for me about this whole topic of education, is that told me that Dale had not told his daughter about any of these background dealings. So he had not told his daughter that this is ridiculous. This low-level teacher is doing this stupid thing because of politics. I went to the principal. I got this approved, right?
Right.
Because if he had told her, she would have had no confusion.
No.
And none of this would have happened.
That's so weird. Okay.
Now, and I was thinking about it, and I was like, well, I can kind of understand why he didn't, because I can imagine that he didn't want to make his daughter feel weird about that teacher.
Right.
Like maybe he didn't want to badmouth that teacher.
Now, was the teacher actually one of his daughter's teachers, or just another teacher at the school who had some sort of objection to the word evolution?
I wish I remembered. I don't know.
Okay. I mean, it is a difference. If the kid doesn't have a daily contact with that teacher, or doesn't need to have a relationship with that teacher, then I would say like fire away dad. But that is a quandary if it is actually one of his daughter's like direct teachers.
And more generally, maybe he didn't want, if he didn't have to, he didn't want to make his daughter feel like this was some weird contested thing. Right.
Yeah.
So I get it.
Yeah.
Thinking about it, I get it. But I think if it had been me, even if it was one of her teachers,
I would have found a tactful way of explaining to the kid exactly what happened.
I think I would have.
And said something like, and it's okay for that teacher. Like, obviously it's not okay for that teacher.
I don't think I would have said it was okay.
No. Just hear me out. To not think that evolution is a thing. Like it's that teacher's right to disbelieve an evolutionary theory, regardless of the preponderance of evidence pointing to it being something that actually exists. It's that teacher's right. What it's not okay is for that teacher to say these things to you because this, that, or the other thing. But I think it would also be an opportunity to bring up why people might believe certain things, or it can open up a number of really interesting conversations. So I think that it's a missed opportunity if he didn't actually have that conversation with his daughter.
And that made me think, because, one of the things we did when we visited my family is we actually went to look at a school, and we've sort of been thinking about what kind of school we want Reader and Go in for the long term.
Yep.
Don't have a lot of choice about where they are right now, though it's been perfectly lovely.
We're very fortunate.
But, we're sort of thinking about that. And it made me realize that in some ways, I don't think I've put as much thought into what I really think schools should be doing as maybe I thought I had.
Okay.
Because there's this interesting issue in schooling where I don't know if I really know like what the most important thing about elementary and to an extent, kind of high school education is supposed to be. So, like if you think about how schools were set up, a lot of the initial, and I haven't done enough research about this as I wanted, but a lot of the sort of initial push of schools was really to take people who had been working in an agrarian society with a lot of flexibility and variety, and getting them used to working in a more industrial society that was much more regimented and timed. And if you look at a lot of what we do in elementary school, I think it's as much about teaching like how to be in the world and in a more institutional setting than it is about anything the kids are learning. And I think in some ways, like one of the most valuable things I learned, even though I went to a great public school and had amazing teachers, like one of the most valuable things I learned is to recognize that it was a system with flaws and that you could play that system if you wanted to. Like that was a very important life lesson. And when I think about the kids' education, I think I'll be pretty direct about that. You know, like if they have a teacher they really don't like, I will talk with them about it and say, look, you can just keep your mouth shut and recognize that this person is an awful human being and get a good grade. Or you can make your feelings known, and that might affect how you get a good grade in your class. And, you know, certainly as your parent, like if that's a choice you make, I will be 100% behind you on that. But like, this is an opportunity to decide how to deal with these things in these kind of situations, because they're going to come up again. Like, how do you want to deal with institutions? I think that's actually a really important part of going to school.
No, I'm behind that.
So I realized like I already sort of like had that philosophy from my own schooling. So I know how I want to deal with that. But, you know, we're sort of talking about how these different things are taught. And it made me realize I don't know what I think about schools' roles in the rest of education. Like, shouldn't they be teaching our kids how to think? And are they doing that now? Like, is that even what I want from schools? I feel like education has changed some. I think there's some more creativity, probably because the way the workforce has changed, more jobs kind of require creativity from kids. But before we get into all of this, I was sort of curious if you had thought through, in an ideal world, what you think kind of the role of going to school should be, particularly in that sort of grade school, middle school zone.
I mean, the reason why I want to talk about the process of education and teaching kids logic or not, teaching kids the scientific method or not, is because part of a school's responsibility is to give a child a foundation, not necessarily of like facts, but of capability. So no matter what they choose to do with their lives, they have this foundation that allows them to, you know, explore their world and have their beliefs comport to reality as closely as possible, to be able to have justified actions, to be able to look at data and opinions and separate the two and place value on them and identify biases and sort of sift through the madness that is the daily life. And I think it's a missed opportunity if schools don't do that. And that I would want, in an ideal world, for my son's schools to do that, to give them the opportunity to learn how to have clearer thoughts and to not be distracted by bad arguments or fallacies, and to not think that they always need to have an answer, and to not place too much of an importance on memorizing lists and facts, even though obviously that's important, especially in like history and science, because you have to have a shared knowledge base that you can then use to discuss these big ideas with other people. But and at the risk of sounding like I'm making, or perhaps just making, an incredulity fallacy, I can't imagine that schools don't already do this to a certain extent, but I also don't want to have my children's education hindered by a school that doesn't even attempt to do these sorts of things. If it's even something that's on many schools' radars. I think that's part of the issue, is that how can you tell beyond just like the bullet point mission statement that you see on school websites or in school literature, or talking to principals or vice principals or guidance counselors about what they want to do with the child's mind, or how they train a child throughout the course of an average school day, or whatever it is. Like, when you get down to the nitty gritty, does the curriculum actually support teaching these things? And beyond that, is it even possible to do?
That's what I'm really wondering. I was trying to think, do you feel like you got this in school?
No, we said this before the re-recording, or at least I did, that I don't think this was ever a formative part of my education. Now, it could very well be that certain things like teaching math helps with a lot of the laws of logic, but when it comes to applying it outside of math and talking about just general argument formation and at a more philosophical level rather than just at a mathematical level, no, I didn't even think about this stuff until college, and then even only in a cursory fashion, because it wasn't beyond just like a basic prerequisite for a degree. It wasn't ever something that was on my radar.
That's so interesting, because I actually recorded with the boys and asked them some of these questions.
Sure.
And Reader, like you, when he thought about it, math was the big thing that came up. And I do think it's interesting that math is one of the few subjects where you inherently have to learn how to work through a problem.
Well, because there's generally speaking going to be an answer. And even though it's a construct, and you're dealing with essentially a imaginary situation where everything is descriptive, it's there. The fact that there is an answer means that you need to have a process that where one step follows the other in a fashion that is repeatable. You know what I mean? Like there's a reason why we can use math to help teach logic. But I think that it shouldn't end there, is my point, is that we should be addressing it in other ways and in other academic fields, in either in literature and writing, or in talking about it in history, talking about it in science. It's everywhere. It should be everywhere. So that multidisciplinary approach really ingrains in kids the need to do it, because very clearly whatever is happening hasn't helped insulate society from conspiracy theories, which seem to have exploded over the last couple of years, the eroding of discourse through layer upon layer of biases and confirmed biases and out groups and othering. And it seems like so much of public discourse is just very toxic. And when I read how people, engage with each other on certain things, it becomes clear that they're acting out of emotion, and they don't really have the tools to discuss these things outside of an emotional context. Like they've accepted the sort of like the pat bullet point boilerplate responses from the ideologues they trust, and for them that's enough. But for my kids, at least, I don't want that to be ever sufficient for anything. Part of being a good skeptic is looking at that and saying, okay, so is this person, even though I agree with them on this other point, is this person actually like accurate on this thing that I'm hearing them say now? Like Richard Dawkins comes to mind when I think of that, right? Like I'll listen to him about evolutionary biology all day long or whatever, but when it comes to like, let's say trans rights, I'm
Maybe not.
I'm not necessarily going to take marching orders from them. You know what I mean? Like you have to be able to differentiate these things. How can you differentiate, the relative validity of a person's positions when you're being confronted with them? Well, you have to have some sort of set of tools you can use. Where do you learn that set of tools? For a lot of people, their parents can't, won't, aren't discussing these things with the children. So where is a child going to learn these things other than school? That's what it comes down. Like, where else will this happen?
It's so interesting you bring that up, because so much of that kind of toxic discourse is moving into the schools, as we've seen with banning.
Separation of church, the church and state separation, like kids getting in trouble for recording teachers going on like pro-Christian nationalist rants.
Yeah.
But in the classroom.
It was interesting because when I was thinking about this, I went through this little thought experiment, because right now, so many of the debates, if you sort of think about that dichotomy between like just teaching facts versus teaching more sort of how to evaluate knowledge, so much of the debate now, because not much of the one thing is taught in schools, so much of the debate now is kind of about what makes up that body of facts that we're going to teach.
Yep.
And so when I was thinking about it, I was like, well, this is sort of an interesting way to actually break through some of those arguments. Because I think when you start focusing more on how to think about what you're learning, it sort of decenters this notion that there's just like an amount of set information that you need to download. So what is on that like list of need to know things becomes less important. And so I was like, could this break through that discourse? But then I was like, in my gut, like I know the people who want those books banned. Like they would not want school even discussing how their child should think. I feel like that is going to be even more toxic, because, I think all of those debates about what should be taught is really more about, I don't even want my child to think about these things. So
they're trying to curate a result, they require the child to end up at a certain position.
Yes.
Instead of having the child have the ability to come to that position, which comes back to what you just said about, bodies of knowledge. A body of knowledge is a body of knowledge, right? It's just a pile of evidences. Whether they're good or bad is irrelevant. It's just, and I don't think even knowledge isn't a good way of describing it. Just like a body of evidences, because the idea of what is a fact has been eroded due to some people not liking their positions not comporting with reality. And so out of necessity, defensively, they seek to erode what is and what is not a fact as like a core concept. And so it's even more important that we have these discussions, that we figure out how to do this, because, if a parent's belief comports with reality, the child will come to that belief or something close to it on their own. They're not going to need the parent to hold their hand and shove them into the room and then close the door so the kid can't get out again. The kid is going to figure it out, right? Like, isn't that the point, that the kid should, that our children should be better than us? That if I have a belief that doesn't actually comport with reality, that doesn't actually, have validity, but I'm not seeing it because of some bias that I have, then would it be awesome if me helping my kid just learn how to the process of evaluation, then my kid sees what I'm doing and calls me on my BS? That helps me, right? Like, isn't this what we want for our kids, for them to be better versions of ourselves? And isn't part of that being able to be better than us, evaluate the world around them, and come to stronger, increasingly strong conclusions and beliefs? Like, I don't know, like it seems like a failure of parenting that you wouldn't want that for your kid.
Yeah. So I just think it's interesting that we are going that in the next.
I feel like Roy Kent.
I think it's interesting that in the next episode, we are moving into the truly speculative of
God,
what
help us.
Education has never been and may never be able to be.
Outside of like science fiction or something.
I
like
know.
Bene Gesserit.
Yeah, but we're going to do it anyways. So
buckle up, everybody.
That's what's coming up. So let's take a second, and I'm going to play what Reader and Go had to say about all this.
Please.
So, Reader, why do you think that we send kids to school? Like, what do you think is the purpose of school?
Because they need to learn.
Oh, that's interesting. So, why do you think they need to learn?
Because they're young and they need to learn how to do math and stuff, but I don't have a really good answer to your question.
How important do you think it is that what you learn be practical things that you need later in life?
That's a hard question to answer.
Yeah. So,
break it down for me, okay?
Okay, that's a great thing to say. So, for example, like to get along in the world, you need to be able to read, right?
Yeah.
Like you need to be able to go to the store and read what it says on boxes so you know what to buy.
Yeah.
You need to be able to read to be able to like read contracts that you might need to sign. So like reading is definitely practical.
Yeah.
What about history? Like you could survive in the world even if you didn't know about things that happened in the past.
Like a survival guide, but you don't know?
Like how important are things that you may not need to survive? Should you still learn those things?
Yeah, you should still learn those things. If you already know them, you should learn them better.
So do you think it would be helpful to learn things that sort of teach you how to think or solve problems?
Yeah, because that's a great way to start thinking about how you process through all these things in a better fashion.
Do you think your school does anything that is more about teaching you how to think as opposed to like remembering a specific thing?
So for what I know, they teach us both.
So do you have an example of something that's more how to think than just something to like remember?
Well, how to think. So they teach us how to think, like they say like times, like the times one instead of minus or subtract. The times one is a different sort of add. So it told us to break it down a tiny bit. They told us like 2 times 7. It says you should say just 2 7s.
Got it.
That's a way of doing it.
Yeah. So a lot of math is thinking about ways to solve problems.
Yeah, to solve problems.
Interesting. Is there anything you're learning about that you think you shouldn't be? That's like a waste of time? Any part of school that you're like, I don't understand why we're doing this?
Well, I don't understand why we're doing French. Why would they want us to learn French?
Oh, so that's super interesting. Because speaking of how your brain works, they have found that learning a new language tests your brain and gets it to think creatively in new ways, in ways other things don't.
Yeah.
It's like a whole different frame of thinking when you have to think in another language.
Okay.
But I understand. where we are, there are not a lot of French speakers. So it kind of feels like now if we go to France.
It would be great to learn French.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which will probably be very unlikely to go to France. Francis.
Why?
What?
Why is what does that mean? Francis what?
Just said Francis.
Does that mean France is good or bad?
What?
Is that good or does that imply good or bad?
Doesn't imply anything. It's just like, I don't know how to explain it. It's just like, I don't know. It's just like something I just do, which is like when I do something weird, I just boom and then.
I understand, but so why do you think we would never go to France?
Well, if I said it's very unlikely to go to France.
Okay, but you don't think like France is particularly cool or particularly not cool. You don't have an opinion.
I don't have an opinion because I haven't visited it yet. But still, it would be nice to learn the language if we did go to France on one of the trips when I'm a grown up.
Cool.
Because I'm in right now.
Thank you. Go. Hi.
Hi.
Okay, so can you stand right here? So, go. Why do you think we send kids to school?
So they learn, and if they don't learn, they wouldn't know how to drive. So then they might crash a car and hurt someone or hurt themselves.
Oh, interesting. So how do you think people decide what subjects to teach in school?
That they think of some of their most favorite things, what are real, not like becoming superheroes, that kind of thing. Just like think of one of the things, what they want to become when they grow up, so they can, and that might give them some ideas so they can pick.
Oh, so you're talking about jobs.
Mm-hmm.
How important do you think it is that what you learn in school is something you can practically use in a job one day?
You can write it down and use that, but you can also learn at the jobs training center if they have it.
Interesting. So do you think, how important do you think it is that the stuff you learn in school is practical? Like you're going to use it in your life one day?
Sometimes if you're actually going to use it, I think it will be fine. But if you're not actually going to use it, I think it's 99% because you might actually get that job later in your life.
Interesting. So do you think it would be good if schools didn't just teach kids subjects, but also things that might sort of help them learn how to think about different subjects and solve problems?
Yeah.
Do you think your school does anything like that now? Like, is there anything that your teacher does that's more about learning how to solve problems as opposed to?
She teaches a couple of kids how to solve some problems. Like if a cat was in a cage, try not to fit your hand through the bars because that might actually make the cat more scared and scratch you. So ask if not someone else to actually break the lock and open the doors to save the cat.
How did that problem come up in class?
Well, one of my students had the lost cat, which made my teacher think of it.
Ah, okay, cool. Is there anything that your teachers are not teaching you about that you think they should be teaching you about?
No. Well, there's one thing. Why we need to drink water.
Ah, that's a good question. We can talk about that later. Do you want to talk about that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is there anything you're learning about that you think is a waste of time? Like you don't understand why you're learning it?
No.
No, it's all good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Awesome. And I think we will wrap it up there. So thank you, as always, to First Frame Music and Jonathan Zalbin for the music we use for this show.
So that wraps up this episode of The Family Skeptical, where nothing is sacred except for our kids.